like to move on to the second speakers, Ibrahim from AgriProFocus. Can I hand over to you to start the presentation?
Of course, thank you very much. And then welcome to all, glad to be here. Do I just share my own screen?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, that's the idea. Okay. Let me see how we do that. Yes. I hope that everyone is able to see the presentation now.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah. Perfect. Yes, well, thanks so much, man. I'm very glad to be here. As I said, very nice that we have this platform to also share our experiences of the last 2 or 3 years. Maybe good to mention up front is sort of bridging from what Herman was just saying in focusing on TSS and the consequences of those, the learnings from that. Is that he also made the comparison in certain situations with the more conventional method of planting seed bulbs, etc. The project that we did in a lesser extent focused on TSS, but more on the end side of how can we, when bulbs are being harvested, how can we make sure that we can increase the shelf life of the shallots, but also really reduce the losses that occur after harvesting. So that was the main intention for our project. So as I said, less focusing on TSS. Today with me is my colleague from AgriProFocus Indonesia, our country facilitator, Miss Maria Liliana. If I'm correct, you can see her as well at the moment. And I will do the presentation mainly in English, but at a certain point, Maria will also sort of highlight our experiences, especially from the second pilot round in Bahasa, also to make it more inclusive and relatable, but also because, well, Lily has been very much involved in communicating with the farmers. As you will see during the presentation, we ran into, well, not quite surprisingly, into also the COVID consequences that required some adaptations to the project that we did. And Lily played a big role in that. So she will also explain a bit more on that during the presentation. So thank you. Just moving towards the first slide here, introducing sort of the project, because the project started in 2018. The geographic location was also on the island of Sumbawa in Indonesia, of course. And as I mentioned, it focused really on the post-harvest losses side of the matter, and what kind of improvements we could bring there, or seeing and learning what works and what doesn't work. Then starting with the consortium was actually because, of course, I'm myself actually from AgriProFocus as a new business coordinator, but we were not the only organization working on this. We did this in a collaboration with BOP Innovation Center that is really focused on developing socially and commercially viable business models, together with Wageningen University, really to analyze the data, to collect the data, to help us with setting up the whole project for verifying the results that we were looking for. Ourselves, of course, where we are really rooted in the Indonesian network, so to say, but also as combining and bringing together all organizations. And with the post-harvest network that provided a lot of in-depth knowledge about post-harvest methods. Apart from these organizations, I also want to explicitly thank, and some of the people were already thanked in presentation of Herman, but thank a number of people that really provided us with valuable input during the project, that really helped us move forward. Those are Jurgen Nagel, Herman, de Putter, of course, Rob Beckers from De Groot en Slot, and also, well, not really colleagues, but friends, let's call them friends, from Bayer and the university, Technological University of Sumbawa, that also helped us in the execution of the project. Moving on, the biggest issue that we worked on was actually when talking to farmers, it was the high cost for purchase of seed bulbs from traders. Farmers didn't have seed bulbs themselves to plant, so each season they had to buy it, which strained their capital, so to say. There was especially a high amount of losses in the wet season, sometimes even running up to 70% of shallots harvested there that were lost in the end. Farmers had a struggle to get a good price from the traders because it was also difficult for them to time the moment on which they could shell their shallots, because they were often forced to sell immediately after harvest due to a lack of proper storage facilities, which led for us to the main conclusions and our main focus on seed bulbs, as I mentioned, really focusing on the wet season because we believe that we can make the biggest impact there. And as a geographic focus, we focused on Sumbawa. Then there were some initial objectives for the project, to at least identify 2 solutions, to test them, to adapt them, actually translate those into commercial pilots, involve 2 companies to have an upgraded solution and or business model that could be employed. And well, of course, we wanted to realize a significant reduction in post-harvest losses. Following that, we did the scoping trip. That was already May in 2018, where we met with different value chain actors, identifying the needs and opportunities, solutions, innovation areas, and business models. And it was already becoming clear quite soon that it was very hard to identify a problem owner beyond the farmer. For example, breeders were looking at this in a quite pragmatic way, that they didn't felt the pain of post-harvest losses there because they just came up to the farmer's gate, bought a number of shallots from them, and then went their way. So the main pain of the losses actually was with the farmers, and not translating that much further into the value chain. Also, what we found was that solutions that we identified initially, like solar dryers, tool for harvesting, certain storage solutions, were actually not appropriate either for the context or for the scale that we were testing at, because some of them were very costly, which were less affordable for the group that we were targeting at this point. And that also made it more difficult to connect to business models for companies. As you remember, one of the objectives was really to involve companies. But we struggled a bit with finding the right incentive for them to be involved. So that focus on the farmers actually led us to come up with 3 main solutions to battle these post-harvest losses. And that's 1, improved planting, because we believe that an improvement in the reduction of losses already begins at the moment of planting, and really taking good care of your crops. So there was an introduction of fungicides, whereas that was hardly used by a number of the farmers. Second of all, we wanted to, because after the harvest of, after the harvest of bulbs, it's really important to make sure that they are dried properly. What happened in the current situation, or in the conventional situation, is that the bulbs were dried on the land underneath sort of a tarp. But that really, in certain, especially in the wet season, it allowed for a lot of moisture to get into the bulbs. And second, it was a really decreased airflow under the tarps. So what we came up with, and that you can see at the right-hand side in somewhat visualized manner, is to elevate, to sort of construct elevated racks on which the bulbs could dry with the tarp over them. So really to increase the airflow there, and to reduce the moisture getting into the bulbs. And the third one was really focusing on an improved storage, whereas traditional and conventional storage is well, where a lot of farmers are storing their shallots on their roofs, so to say, hanging them down from the roof. We also worked together with a farmer who really had a more warehouse type of storage that he allowed us to improve the temperature control, to improve the airflow, and seeing what results that might bring. So then the challenges already addressed that we encountered for the first pilot round is to really identify additional problem owners, to connect to the private sector and the affordability of solutions. To still follow up on that, we contacted breeders, extension officers, farmer suppliers, seed companies, also reached out to a number of private sector organizations with whom we had very interesting conversations in many situations, also thinking about interesting solutions, but often came down to the affordability of the solutions or the technologies for the group of farmers that we were focusing on. And then we entered into the first pilot round where we adapted this storage from a farmer called Paksa Budin. We developed spraying and curing protocols for the farmers, and actually did a sort of lightweight version of capacity building to train them on sort of the newly prescribed methods for planting, harvesting, curing, and storage. To also make a proviso here is that we got some results from the first pilot round. However, the data was very flawed because we saw some flaws in our experimental setup. We had very much difficulty with local coordination and really monitoring farmers, following up, getting the right results and getting the right data in. But at least what we could see is that improved drying seemed to have an effect on storage losses. But we also saw that farmers actually seem to prefer traditional storage methods over the improved storage. So that was quite an interesting insight, and started us thinking, why is that? And there were, due to the poor quality of the data, there were unclear results of the fungicide application because there were big differences per farmers and sometimes even opposite results per farmer. So some of the lessons that we learned there was that one, the behavior of the farmers was very interesting to observe, because what we did in our setup was actually to agree with them. We provided them with a number of fungicide and asked them to spray that on 20% of their crops, so that we could compare it to the other 80% that were sort of left untreated. But in reality, we saw farmers using the fungicides for 100% of their shallots, and in some cases even using the how you call it, the fungicides for totally different crops as well. So that was really for us something that sort of planted the first seed of, hey, behavior change in this sense is probably or maybe equally important as introducing these new methods, these new technologies, because it's also a lot in applying and really learning new methods. There was a monitoring by students from UTS that was sort of done from a distance, and also in sort of a relation to the farmers. We saw that there was some monitoring that was not going as that we expected in the first place. Still not really sure why that was the case. Maybe it had something to do with sort of a power relation between students and farmers, and well, that's something that we are still trying to find out. Local coordination. We didn't have a control group, which led to some issues. And one of the things is that in treating the bulbs with fungicides during planting, we also became aware of the fact that actually dipping the bulbs in fungicides before planting could also really be an effective means of decreasing losses. So that's also something that we introduced after the first pilot round. And we learned that we had to improve our experimental setup to get better data in in the second round. So really sort of in a nutshell, translating that into the improvements, it's a more hands-on involvement. We really want to be there at crucial times in the planting season, at harvesting, at curing, at storage. We want to improve the experimental setup. So really having clear points in time where we did the measuring really consistently. And we want to include a new control group with farmers that really didn't do all of these things to have a really good comparable material. Change the composition of farmer groups slightly, and we want to introduce a voucher scheme for the compensation of fungicide purchase, because we saw that that was also a big capital cost. So on the left-hand side here on the picture, you actually see one of the improvements in the experimental setup that we did, is that we really asked farmers to demarcate certain areas of their fields where after harvest they actually counted the number of bulbs that they harvested there compared to the rest of the field, to see how we can see improvements there. And then I think it was about March when we actually prepared for this second pilot round that took place this year. But at the same time, we were struck by the COVID pandemic, as you all know, which had a certain influence on our project, because one of the things that we wanted to improve was the hands-on coordination on site. But it really changed our project activities since we couldn't be there anymore. That led us to be a bit creative on what we still want to achieve within the project, where we said we still want to, collect the data and still see what kind of data we can collect from a second pilot round, but also focus more on behavioral change communication from a distance, remotely. And we wanted to look at scaling opportunities. So if these practices do work, how can we take that next step to really upgrade these methods, get them to a larger scale, or maybe improve it even more? There were also some consequences, of course, of the COVID pandemic. That was, for example, well, we want to introduce a control group with whom we had the first talks beginning of March, but that ended quite abruptly because of the travel ban. Same goes for conversations with retailers over voucher schemes that seem to be impossible to introduce remotely. We had to provide remote support to the farmers. Well, you can see an example of that on the right-hand side, where we had a lot of contact through Skype and remote communication methods. On the right-hand side, you see two of the lead farmers that were involved in the project. And in the corners of the screen, you can see my colleague Lily having the conversations with the farmers. And we really improved our protocols and training materials, translated them into audio files so we could send it to them, and they could get spoken messages, spoken explanations on several of the steps to take. And we organized various webinars to keep the interaction going on what we were doing and what we're trying to achieve. Then for the second pilot round, and then this is a bit premature to already discuss in depth, I think, because these results only came in last week. So it was really sort of a last minute thing to add to the presentation. So these are really preliminary results. We really still need to dig in further how conclusive they are. So that's really a remark that I want to make and that I want you to note in interpreting these results. What we see is that the dipping really led to a decrease of plants not growing and rotting from 20% to 5%. So that lead to significantly higher yields with the farmers within our group. We saw that the improved curing decreases the curing time by 4 days. And normally this is around 10 to 15 days. So also 4 days is really a significant step there. And it also resulted in better quality bulbs for storage. The improved curing also led to less damaged bulbs. We saw that it led to a 4.2% reduction on average losses in storage. Also here, important to note is that this really considers the weight of the shallots, while, as I mentioned, focusing on seed bulbs, it's more or less it's actually quite important to know the number of seed bulbs is actually a bit more relevant than the weight. But that's something where we're also looking into in the last 2 months of the project. Then we saw that properly stored bulbs, so that were in the improved storage, only took 1 day to start growing when they were planted for the next season, as opposed to 10 days for freshly harvested bulbs, so that were sort of harvested and immediately used for planting again. And the improved storage led to a 6.3 loss reduction compared to traditional methods. So those are some of the preliminary results that we got from the project, from the pilot round that was actually finished, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. And we got that from, one, the quantitative data that we got from several points in time during the planting and harvesting season, but also from performing some interviews with the farmers to really dig in their experiences over the season and let them compare those results to previous situations. Then sort of moving on to ending up the presentations with the lessons learned. As I started before, is that we mentioned that actually the behavior change communication became an important part of the project. In that regard, something that we developed was sort of multiple communication methods through which we could convey the message of these improved practices. So one of the things that were developed is a T-shirt, and that was also because there was a desire from the farmers to have a T-shirt to be really connected to the project. And the idea came up with us is to see how can such a T-shirt have multiple means, not only providing that collectiveness, but also sort of using it as informing. So on the right-hand side, you see the T-shirt that resulted from that. Actually, we developed more or less of a total campaign idea that focused on Mr. Bawang, who you will see on the T-shirt as well, sort of being the archetypal farmer that introduces new ways to increase his income, to get better quality bulbs, etc. So briefly running through the lessons learned, and I'll pick the most important ones is, well, we saw that the remote support in COVID times can be very effective means of providing support to farmers. But I also here want to give the word to my colleague Lily to sort of explain in Bahasa a little bit on how we provided that remote support and what the experiences were there. So Lily, could you please unmute?
Thank you, Ibrahim, for the time for me to talk about my experience in supporting Shallot farmers and collecting data during COVID-19 pandemic. And I will continue in Bahasa since I see there are many Indonesian participants in here and to be a clear information. And in the end, Ibrahim will sum up it in English. Ya, sebelumnya saya mau sapa dulu Bapak Ibu yang bergabung dalam webinar ini. Selamat sore semuanya. Izinkan saya menyampaikan sedikit pengalaman terkait dengan mendampingi petani dalam situasi pandemi dan juga mengumpulkan data terkait dengan post-harvest management. Ya, ini merupakan pengalaman yang sangat berharga bagi saya karena selain menyukai bidang pengembangan masyarakat, saya juga menyukai bidang pertanian. Dan kita ketahui bersama juga bahwa komoditas bawang merah adalah komoditas yang sangat penting, salah satu komoditas yang sangat penting di Indonesia. Nah, sejak join dalam proyek bawang merah, saya berpikir bahwa komunikasi dan relasi yang baik yang dibangun dengan petani adalah salah satu kunci untuk keberhasilan dalam suatu proyek. Sejak itu, kita mencoba untuk melakukan pendekatan dan membangun hubungan dan relasi yang baik bagi para petani. Ya, karena para petani inilah yang kemudian akan mengaplikasikan metode-metode yang kita sarankan, baik itu mulai dari menanam, dalam penjemuran, dan juga dalam penyimpanan. Menjadi seorang teman bagi petani membuat komunikasi kita lebih mudah untuk dijalankan. Dan pada saat Maret lalu, ketika pandemi COVID mulai datang di Indonesia, dan kita juga harus melakukan dan melanjutkan proyek ini di musim tanam pertama pada bulan Maret saat itu. Tantangan yang harus kita hadapi adalah bagaimana kita tidak bisa ke lapangan saat itu, tetapi harus melanjutkan record data dan juga support kepada petani. Nah, jadi kita menggunakan metode pendampingan jarak jauh. Kita dan petani menyepakati adanya jadwal tetap untuk kita berkomunikasi sebagai media sharing dan juga transfer knowledge. Selain itu, kita juga membuat beberapa modul, tabel monitoring berat bawang, dan recording suara yang dikemas semenarik dan sesederhana mungkin agar bisa dipahami dengan petani. Itulah cara kita melakukan transfer knowledge selama pandemi COVID-19. Dan alhamdulillah semuanya berjalan dengan baik walaupun kita jarak jauh. Semua data dapat dikumpulkan dengan baik dan para petani yang mengaplikasikan metode ini di Sumbawa juga dapat mengikutinya dengan baik. Ya, di samping transfer knowledge terkait post-harvest management, kita juga selalu menyampaikan edukasi kesehatan untuk memerangi COVID-19, seperti pakai masker, jaga jarak, dan juga menghindari kerumunan, dan lain sebagainya. Ya, dan menggunakan komunikasi jarak jauh ini tentunya tidak mudah untuk dilakukan, apalagi para petani di Sumbawa itu masih sangat kesulitan ya dalam hal media komunikasi dan juga sinyal dan segala macam. Tetapi akhirnya kita berhasil memanage segala sesuatunya dengan baik, sehingga proyek ini dapat berjalan dengan baik walau dalam situasi pandemi, dan data-data yang kita kumpulkan selama kegiatan ini juga dapat dengan lengkap. Sehingga hasil yang kita dapatkan seperti yang sudah tadi dipresentasikan oleh Ibrahim, kita dapat menemukan berapa losses, berapa susut bawang yang dialami para petani di musim tanam 1 mulai dari April hingga bulan Juli lalu. Ya, mungkin itu saja yang bisa saya sampaikan saat ini. For the next, I will hand over to you, Ibrahim. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lily, for sharing your experiences and the way that we worked on this project, and especially in relation to the farmers. Not going to repeat your whole story in English for the non-Bahasa speaking participants, but really highlighting, I think, 3 main points is that what Lily mentioned is that it's really important to build, especially when supporting remotely, which might be an actual reality for the next, well, at least the next year. It is important to really build a good relationship with the farmers, to create trust, and that really requires some time and frequent communication. Really trying to be a good friend to them is actually very important, and really make it a personal approach. Another thing that we did was really trying to see, like, how can we translate things that we normally would say or do on location? How can we translate that into audio files or visual material that we can share with them? And the third thing was a funny thing is that it, especially in the last couple of months, it sometimes felt like we were not only working on an agricultural project, but also sort of on a health project. Because in providing doing our capacity building activities with farmers, we also in each situation kept stressing how important the adherence to COVID regulations were. Because from time to time we saw with farmers that also from pictures that were sent, we saw that a certain approach towards the regulations. And we also felt it's sort of our obligation to really, sort of a social obligation to really stress the importance of adherence to regulations, to trying to fight the pandemic in that sense. So really wrapping up the presentation here is highlighting some of the main lessons learned. Was that an unintended effect is that we saw that through the improved curing, the farmers actually also improved their selection of bulbs of which to store and which not to store, which led to decreases in losses. So selection also had an effect. What we also saw was that, well, the increased success of storing led to a decrease in capital needs for purchasing new bulbs for the next season. We also saw that in relation to that the combination of, especially the combination of improved curing and storage seemed to be a very reasonable alternative to purchasing seed bulbs from external sources. And finally, we saw that dipping not only decreases the losses, but also decreases an intense need for chemical use during the planting season. So that was also interesting to find out, especially because, as you see a bullet above, that the cost of crop protection is really a big issue for farmers from time to time. Again, I find it important that to say that we got these results in last week, translated it for this presentation, but there still needs to be some thorough digging to do still on the data, because to really estimate how conclusive this all is. And then moving to my last slide on conclusions and recommendations, really quickly running through them all, is that the coordinating through remote support was actually quite successful. We didn't expect that. We thought that the COVID situation really ruined our intentions for the second pilot round, but we really find a way to effectively provide remote support, as Lily just mentioned. And I really want to applaud our personal, our own team from AgriProFocus in Indonesia that really made that happen. Then we also saw that attention for farmer behavior is at least equally as important as the technical solutions and the improvements that we introduced. One of the interesting things is that the incentives in the value chain do not necessarily lead to the best quality of shallots, because one of the things that we also saw, as I mentioned, that curing on the ground in the conventional method really allowed moisture to get into the bulbs. But what we see is that traders are purchasing by weight. So for a farmer, if you want to sell your shallots immediately after harvest, there's actually a big incentive to dry them on the ground, because they will contain more moisture and have more weight. So you can get a better price per bulb, which led to the realization that there are some incentives that not necessarily lead to the best production or the best storage or best curing methods. Another thing that we found interesting was, let me see, that there were also health consequences, because what we learned throughout the project is that instead of using fungicides, some farmers also dipped shallots or sprayed them with diesel like gasoline to prevent them from pests. So this looks like a much better alternative for that, also from a health perspective. And we also do definitely see some recommendations for follow-up of the things that we've done over the past 2-3 years. That's really scaling up the behavioral change communication, really extending that campaign. We introduced t-shirts. We are now also developing an animated video sort of informing on these new practices. But we could also think of a campaign rolling out that Mr. Bawang campaign, so to say, with retailers to inform farmers through those channels about improved methods and ways to increase their income and to increase their harvest. Further business modeling is definitely required. That's also something that will take place in the next 1.5 months, in which we will finish up the project. And that will also go for a financial scheme and some recommendations on further improving practices and experimental setup for sort of testing these practices on a larger scale. And one of the things is also definitely worth into exploring is a more eco-friendly treatment for shallots. So seeing whether there are alternatives for the fungicides that are currently being used to have a smaller ecological footprint. So that's sort of in a, well, nutshell, some background on the project that we did, some of the results, some lessons learned, some recommendations from that. So that leaves me with really thanking you as participants for your attention, thanking all organizations and individuals that I mentioned in the beginning, especially that helped make this happen. So thank you, terima kasih.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ibrahim and Mbak Lily, for your very insightful presentation and sharing your experience. Yeah, I will just shortly read the first question from Retno Pangestuti, which is, yeah, you said on your presentation that about improving storage to reduce losses. Yeah, we were curious and wondering why farmer more prefer traditional storage over the improved storage. Do you have any further information about this question?
Yeah, I think that relates to what we mentioned as one of the results in the of the first pilot round. We were quite surprised by that too, but I think that was again, we believe that the results from the improved storage would be better. It did not show from the data in the first pilot round, although it did in the second pilot round, and it also led us to the conviction that, as we mentioned in the presentation, that it's not only about providing and offering new methods, but also really looking into the beliefs of farmers, of their convictions, and the adherence to more conventional methods, because we're talking about people here that have been farming in a way for 10, 15, 20 years. And now all of a sudden you're asking them to adopt a new method. And you gotta have some good results convincing them that it works. So we noticed that took some time, and actually the fact that they seemed at that point to prefer conventional storage over improved storage really made us work harder to see, like, okay, why is that? Why are the convictions there? And can we sort of convince them from of the fact that improved storage delivers better results?
Yeah,
does that answer the question?
Yeah, is it also yeah, due to the maybe high investment on the improved storage? Yeah, either on the capital or maybe yeah, human power, manpower. I mean,
for the manpower and the cost of improved storage. No, that was not really a factor there, because the person that we worked together with was a lead farmer that already had that storage, so they could just sort of bring their harvested shallots to him, and he would store it in his improved storage. But still, many farmers prefer to keep their shallots at home and store it in the conventional way. So we don't have the impression that it had to do with costs, because the solution was already there, but really with conviction and beliefs that are sort of ingrained through working in a certain way for a large number of years.
Okay, thank you. So maybe I will now just read the final question, because we're running out of the time. Yeah, I will read this question in Bahasa, because this is very related to yang Mbak Lily experience. Ya Mbak Lily, ini ada pertanyaan dari Bapak Firdausi Akbar. Bagaimana selama ini trainers bisa mengatasi konflik sosial untuk kebanyakan petani? Ya, sorry, sebentar. Ya, itu Mbak. Ya, sorry, saya ulang kembali. Bagaimana selama ini trainers bisa mengatasi konflik sosial untuk kebanyakan petani yang masih sulit untuk menerima teknologi baru? Contohnya mereka masih kurang terbuka dengan disiplin ilmu yang dibawa dari Impact atau AgriProFocus dalam hal ini untuk meningkatkan produksinya seperti itu. Karena juga kami di Yayasan Binatang Sejahtera juga menemui banyak case yang serupa di Indonesia Timur, bahwa masih banyak petani yang kesulitan untuk menggunakan teknologi seperti smartphone seperti itu, Mbak. Silakan.
Ya, terima kasih Mas Andi sudah memberikan pertanyaannya. Ya, memang tidak dipungkiri bahwa di masyarakat juga banyak sekali konflik-konflik sosial, apalagi yang kita belum mengetahui secara pasti budaya dan kondisi masyarakat di sana. Itu pasti. Dengan membawa metode baru dan memberikannya kepada masyarakat juga itu merupakan satu tantangan yang besar, di mana mereka sudah memiliki kebiasaan-kebiasaan yang selama ini sudah dilakukan bertahun-tahun gitu. Ya, jadi kalau dari kami sendiri AgriProFocus itu mencoba metode untuk menyampaikan metode itu sesederhana mungkin yang bisa dipahami dengan konteks lokal mereka. Misalnya ketika kita membuat improvisasi di bagian pengeringan, kita perhatikan di sumber daya lokal yang ada apa, oh di sana ada bambu. Oke, berarti kita harus membuat curing bed dari bambu karena di sana ada bambu. Sementara kalau kita perhatikan di Lombok sendiri, untuk metode pengeringan mereka lebih memakai metode menggantung. Sementara kalau di Sumbawa kita sesuaikan dengan konteks lokal, mereka lebih sesuai dengan menggunakan rak bambu gitu. Jadi menggunakan konteks lokal itu sangat membantu kita untuk bisa menerapkan metode-metode yang kita ingin sarankan atau ingin mereka terapkan gitu. Jadi tetap cari sumber daya dan konteks lokal apa yang mereka punya, itu akan sangat membantu kita gitu. Dan yang kunci yang paling pentingnya jaga relasi yang baik dengan mereka dan jaga komunikasi. Ya, itu aja mungkin, Mas.
Ya, terima kasih banyak Mbak Lili. Thank you very much for your answer. Yeah, I'm very sorry because yeah, I have to stop this session. Yeah, as we're running out of the time. So I will be, yeah, thank you very much, Ibrahim and Mbak Lili from AgriProFocus. I will be wrapping up for now, and of course, thanking all speakers and also all participants for joining us today. Yeah, in Shallot webinar 2020. Yeah, if you are curious and you miss out some topics, you can find yeah, the video on our YouTube channel, or also you can get the presentation slides on the link provided by our team. So yeah, for your information, we still have two sessions for tomorrow about biological control, Sporothera, and Shallot integrated pest management, consumer preference on Shallot, Shallot production in West Nusa Tenggara, TSS knowledge transfer in Sumbawa. So yeah, on behalf of all of us here, I would like to thank you and have a good day and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Thank you.